Ethan Carter drove slowly down the narrow road that led to Maple Ridge. It had been almost 10 years since he last set foot in this quiet little town. Life had taken him far away, to bustling cities, crowded offices, and noisy streets. But now he was coming back. His mother, Margaret, had passed away, and though they weren't close, her death weighed heavily on him. She was always distant, speaking in riddles about their family history. But she was still his mother. And now, she was gone. The drive felt longer than Ethan remembered. The trees lining the road seemed taller, their branches twisting together, like old friends catching up after years apart. The air smelled different here, crisp, earthy, and tinged with the scent of fallen leaves. As he pulled into the driveway of his childhood home, memories came rushing back. He could almost hear the echo of his own footsteps running through the hallways, the creak of the wooden stairs, and the sound of his mother's voice calling him for dinner. But those days were long gone. Ethan didn't stay long at the house. It felt too empty, too hollow without her. Instead, he headed straight to the cemetery on the outskirts of town. The place was small, tucked away behind a grove of oak trees. Rows of headstones stood silently, some new and polished, others cracked and overgrown with moss. He found his mother's grave easily enough. It was one of the newest ones. A plain stone marked where she lay, bearing only her name, Margaret Carter, along with the dates of her birth and death. Standing there, staring at the grave, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The dirt covering the grave looked loose, almost as if someone had dug it up recently and tried to cover their tracks. At first he thought maybe animals had disturbed it, or perhaps heavy rain had caused the soil to shift. But no matter how hard, he tried to convince himself otherwise. The nagging suspicion wouldn't leave him alone. Something wasn't right. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan made a decision. He borrowed a shovel from an elderly neighbor named Mr. Harper, who lived just down the street. Mr. Harper raised an eyebrow when Ethan asked for it, but didn't press further. "Just be careful," the old man said, handing over the tool. "Some things are better left undisturbed." Armed with the shovel, Ethan returned to the cemetery under the cover of darkness. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale silver light across the graves. Shadows stretched long and twisted, making the place feel even more unsettling than during the day. Ethan hesitated for a moment, gripping the handle of the shovel tightly. What was he doing? Digging up his own mother's grave? It sounded crazy even to him. But the unease in his chest refused to fade, and curiosity won out over reason. He started digging carefully, trying not to make too much noise. The soil was soft, easier to move than he expected. As he worked, memories flooded back, memories of his mother. She had always been strange, distant, lost in her own world. When Ethan was younger, she would sit by the window for hours, staring out at nothing, muttering under her breath. Sometimes she'd tell him stories about their family, tales of ancestors who had settled in Maple Ridge centuries ago. These stories were never ordinary. They involved secrets, warnings, and promises of protection. At the time, Ethan dismissed them as nonsense, the ramblings of a woman whose mind was slipping. But now, standing in the middle of the night with a shovel in hand, he wondered if there might have been truth in her words. It took longer than he anticipated to reach the coffin. By the time he did, sweat dripped down his forehead and his arms ached from the effort. With trembling hands, he pried open the lid, half expecting to see his mother lying there peacefully. But what he found instead left him stunned. There was no body inside the coffin. Instead, there was a small wooden box wrapped in faded linen cloth. It looked ancient, its surface scarred with age and wear. Ethan froze, unsure of what to do next. This wasn't supposed to happen. Where was his mother? Why was there a box instead of her remains? Slowly, he reached out and lifted the box from the coffin. It was surprisingly light, almost as if it contained nothing at all. He unwrapped the cloth, revealing intricate carvings etched into the wood. Symbols he didn't recognize spiraled across the surface, giving the box an otherworldly appearance. Curiosity got the better of him. Carefully, he opened the lid and peered inside. The contents were unexpected. brittle letters written in a language he couldn't understand, a tarnished silver locket containing what appeared to be dried petals, and a journal filled with frantic scribbles. Flipping through the pages, Ethan realized the writing belonged to his mother. Her handwriting was shaky, as if she'd been in a hurry, or afraid. One entry caught his attention. It spoke of something called the Veil, described as a boundary between worlds. His mother wrote about hearing whispers beneath the ground, voices urging her to protect whatever was inside the box. She claimed these voices belonged to beings who existed long before humans walked the earth. According to her, the Carters had been chosen to guard the box, tasked with keeping its contents safe from those who sought to misuse them. Ethan closed the journal, his mind racing. None of this made sense. Who were these beings? What was the Veil? And why had his mother gone to such lengths to hide the truth? One thing was certain: this discovery changed everything. Whatever secrets his mother had kept hidden were now in his hands, and he had no idea what to do with them. As he stood there, holding the box, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The whispers his mother had written about, they weren't just in her imagination. He could hear them too, faint and indistinct, coming from somewhere deep within the box. They sounded like voices murmuring in a language he couldn't comprehend. For a moment, he considered putting the box back and walking away, pretending none of this had ever happened. But something stopped him. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was simply the need to know the truth. Whatever the reason, Ethan knew one thing for sure: he couldn't leave the box behind. Not yet. Taking a deep breath, he wrapped it back up in the linen cloth and carried it out of the cemetery. The night air felt colder than before, biting at his skin as he walked back to his car. As he drove away, the whispers grew louder, echoing in his ears like a warning. Little did he know, uncovering the box was only the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. Ethan sat alone in his childhood home, the wooden box resting on the kitchen table in front of him. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the occasional creak of the floorboards settling or the distant hum of crickets outside. He stared at the artifacts laid out before him, the brittle letters, the tarnished locket, and the journal filled with his mother's frantic scribbles. Each item seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if they carried secrets too heavy for one person to bear. Ethan felt overwhelmed, unsure where to begin unraveling the mystery. He picked up the journal first, flipping through its pages slowly. His mother's handwriting grew more erratic as he progressed, her words spilling onto the paper like a desperate confession. She wrote about dreams that haunted her, visions of shadowy figures standing just beyond the edge of sight, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. These beings, she claimed, spoke to her in whispers, urging her to protect the box at all costs. They warned of something called the Veil, a boundary separating two worlds. If the veil were to break, the consequences would be catastrophic. Margaret described how the Carters had been chosen generations ago to guard the artifacts inside the box. According to her, their family had settled in Maple Ridge not by chance but because of the land itself. Beneath the soil, she wrote, lay ancient pathways leading to places no human should ever go. Her entries became increasingly cryptic, mentioning rituals, sacrifices, and promises made long before her time. One passage stood out. They watch us from the other side. Their voices grow louder each day. I can feel them pressing against the veil, testing its strength. If it breaks, they will come. And when they do, only the box can stop them. Ethan closed the journal, his hands trembling. None of this made sense. How could his mother believe such things? Was she truly hearing voices, or had fear driven her mad? Yet, deep down, he couldn't dismiss her words entirely. There was something undeniably real about the box and its contents, something that defied logic. The whispers he'd heard earlier, that hadn't been his imagination, had it? Determined to find answers, Ethan turned his attention to the locket. It was small and delicate, the silver surface dulled by age. Inside, pressed between two tiny glass panels, were dried petals. They looked ordinary enough, But as Ethan held the locket closer to the light, he noticed faint markings etched into the metal frame. Tiny symbols, similar to those carved into the wooden box, spiraled around the edges. He tried opening the locket again, hoping to see if there was anything hidden beneath the petals, but it wouldn't budge. Frustrated, he set it aside and reached for the brittle letters. The letters were written in a language Ethan didn't recognize. The ink had faded over time, making some parts illegible, but certain phrases stood out. Phrases like "chosen ones" and "guardians of the threshold" appeared repeatedly. Whoever had written these letters clearly believed the Carters played a vital role in protecting something far greater than themselves. Ethan wondered if they were letters from ancestors, passed down through generations, or messages meant for someone else entirely. As he sifted through the items, a sudden noise startled him. It came from upstairs, a soft creak, almost imperceptible but enough to send a shiver down his spine. Ethan froze, listening intently. The house was old. It wasn't unusual for it to make strange sounds. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Grabbing the flashlight from the counter, he cautiously climbed the stairs, heart pounding in his chest. The second floor was darker than he remembered, the moonlight filtering weakly through the curtains. Room by room, he checked every corner, finding nothing out of place. But as he approached the attic door, he hesitated. The attic had always been off limits when he was younger. His mother never explained why, simply telling him it was private. Now standing in front of the door, Ethan felt a pull, a compulsion to open it and see what lay inside. Taking a deep breath, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. Dust motes floated lazily in the beam of his flashlight, revealing stacks of boxes and forgotten furniture covered in white sheets. But in the center of the room, partially hidden beneath a tarp, was something unusual. A large, ornate mirror framed in dark wood. Its surface was clouded, as if years of neglect had dulled its reflective quality. Yet as Ethan stepped closer, he realized the mirror wasn't completely opaque. Faint shapes moved within it, indistinct and fleeting, like shadows dancing just out of reach. He reached out to touch the frame, but the moment his fingers brushed against the wood, the whispers returned, louder this time, clearer. They surrounded him, filling the air with a cacophony of voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand. Panic surged through him, and he stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The mirror's surface rippled, distorting the shapes within until they formed a single figure, a tall, gaunt silhouette with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. It stared directly at him, unmoving, before vanishing into the haze. Ethan bolted from the attic, slamming the door shut behind him. His mind raced as he descended the stairs, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Was the mirror connected to the box? Had his mother known about it? Questions swirled in his head, but one thing was clear. He needed help. Someone who might know more about the history of Maple Ridge and the Carter family. The next morning, Ethan visited Claire, an elderly woman who had been Margaret's closest friend. Claire lived in a cozy little house near the edge of town, surrounded by flower beds and bird feeders. She greeted him warmly, inviting him inside for tea. When Ethan explained what he'd found in his mother's grave, Claire's expression shifted from curiosity to unease. "Margaret always said your family had a duty," Claire said softly, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. "She used to talk about the veil, though I never understood what she meant. She said it was weakening, that something was trying to get through." "What kind of something?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. Claire hesitated, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone or something to appear. She called them Watchers, ancient beings older than the earth itself. She believed they wanted the box, that they'd been waiting for centuries to claim it. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Why didn't she tell me any of this? "She tried," Claire replied. "But you were so young when you left and she didn't want to burden you. She thought she could handle it herself." The conversation left Ethan with more questions than answers. As he drove back to his mother's house, he couldn't stop thinking about the mirror in the attic and the figure he'd seen. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than he'd imagined. And somehow, he was right in the middle of it. That night, unable to sleep, Ethan returned to the kitchen table. He opened the locket once more, determined to unlock its secrets. This time, as he examined it closely, he noticed a tiny latch hidden along the edge. With careful effort, he managed to pry it open. Inside, beneath the dried petals, was a scrap of parchment bearing a single phrase: "Speak the name." Confused, Ethan turned the parchment over, searching for more clues. There was nothing else written on it. Speak whose name? His mother's? The Watcher's? Or perhaps someone else entirely? As he stared at the words, the whispers grew louder, again echoing in his ears. They sounded urgent now, almost pleading. Taking a deep breath, Ethan whispered the only name that came to mind: Mother. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the floorboards beneath him cracked loudly, startling him. A section of the wooden floor gave way, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was another artifact, a jagged shard of black stone that pulsed faintly, with an eerie, unnatural energy. Ethan reached for it hesitantly, feeling its weight in his hand. It vibrated slightly, as if alive. Whatever this stone was, it was tied to the box, the locket, and the whispers. And Ethan knew, without a doubt, that he was running out of time. Ethan stared at the jagged shard of black stone, its faint pulse beating like a second heartbeat in his hand. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, swirling around him as if they came from every corner of the room. He could feel their urgency, their desperation. They weren't just random sounds, they were trying to tell him something. But what? He placed the shard on the table next to the other artifacts: the wooden box, the locket, the brittle letters, and his mother's journal. Each item seemed connected, part of a puzzle he was only beginning to piece together. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, the answers remained just out of reach. One thing was certain: the shard had led him to uncover the hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, which meant it held significance beyond its strange appearance. Whatever it was important. Unable to ignore the growing sense of dread, Ethan decided to revisit his mother's journal. Maybe there was something he had missed earlier, some clue that would help him understand the shard's purpose. Flipping through the pages again, he found an entry he hadn't paid much attention to before. The veil is thinning. I can hear them, more clearly now. They speak of a key, a fragment of their world left behind. It glows with power, calling to those who know how to listen. Without it, the barrier cannot hold. With it, we may yet seal the breach. Ethan froze. The shard. That had to be what she was talking about. If the shard was the key mentioned in the journal, then it was essential to protecting the veil, or sealing it if it came to that. But where did the veil exist, and how could he use the shard to interact with it? His thoughts returned to Claire's words. She had mentioned ancient beings, watchers older than the earth itself, waiting to cross over. Margaret had written about pathways beneath the soil leading to forbidden places. Could these tunnels still exist? If so, perhaps they led to the source of the whispers, or even to the veil itself. Determined to find out, Ethan grabbed the shard, the lantern, and the journal. Before leaving, he paused, staring at the mirror in the attic. Should he take it with him? Something about the mirror felt dangerous, as though it might attract unwanted attention. Reluctantly, he decided to leave it behind, for now. The cemetery was his first stop. Using an old map he'd found tucked inside the journal, he traced a route from the gravesite to a network of underground tunnels that ran beneath Maple Ridge. According to the map, the entrance was hidden near the edge of the woods, marked by a cluster of 3 crooked trees. Ethan recognized the spot immediately. It was a place he used to play as a child, though back then, he'd never noticed anything unusual about it. Pushing aside thick vines and brush, Ethan uncovered the mouth of the tunnel. It was narrow and dark, the air inside cool and damp. Holding the lantern high, he stepped inside, the soft glow illuminating the rough-hewn walls. Roots twisted through the ceiling, dripping water onto the muddy ground. The further he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The whispers followed him, growing louder with each step until they formed a constant hum in his ears. As he ventured deeper, Ethan began to notice carvings etched into the walls. They depicted humanoid figures bowing to shadowy entities, their forms elongated and grotesque. Among the carvings was a symbol identical to the one on the locket. It appeared repeatedly, sometimes surrounded by stars, other times encircled by flames. The sight sent chills down his spine. Whoever, or whatever, these carvings represented, they were connected to the artifacts in the veil. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The ceiling here was higher, supported by natural stone pillars. At the center of the room stood an altar made of black rock, its surface cracked and weathered. Etched into the altar was the same symbol from the locket and the carvings. Ethan approached cautiously, his lantern casting flickering shadows across the space. Placing the shard on the altar, he waited, unsure of what to expect. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the whispers erupted into a deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath his feet. The shard began to glow, pulsing brighter and brighter until the entire chamber was bathed in an eerie light. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and writhing as if alive. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. Cracks spread across the floor, widening into fissures that revealed glimpses of something below. An abyss filled with shifting shapes and glowing eyes. From the darkness emerged a figure, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes and elongated limbs. Its presence was overwhelming, radiating both fear and awe. It regarded Ethan silently, tilting its head as if studying him. Ethan stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. What are you?" he stammered, though he already suspected the answer. The being didn't respond verbally, but its gaze pierced through him, conveying emotions too complex for words. Fear, curiosity, anger, all rolled into one. Slowly it raised a skeletal hand, pointing toward the shard. Then without warning it vanished, melting back into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. The tremors subsided, and the whispers faded, leaving an oppressive silence in their wake. Ethan stood frozen, his heart racing. Whatever that thing was, it wanted the shard. Or maybe it wanted him to do something with it. Either way, he knew he couldn't stay in the tunnels any longer. Gathering the shard and the lantern, he turned and ran, retracing his steps through the winding passages until he reached the surface. Back in the fresh air, Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The shard pulsed gently in his hand, its energy subdued but still present. He didn't fully understand what had happened down there, but one thing was clear. The beings beyond the veil were real, and they were watching. Whether they were allies or enemies, he couldn't say. All he knew was that the shard, and the secrets it carried, was tied to his family's legacy, and it was up to him to protect it. As he walked back toward town, exhaustion weighing heavily on him, Ethan realized this was far from over. The journey ahead would be dangerous, possibly deadly. But he also knew he couldn't turn back. The truth lay buried deeper than anyone could imagine, and he was determined to uncover it. One step at a time. Ethan woke up drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if he'd run miles in his sleep. The dream had been vivid, too vivid. He was back in the underground chamber, standing before the altar with the black shard glowing brighter than ever. But this time the whispers weren't just sounds. They were voices, clear and urgent, speaking directly to him. They told him what he needed to do next. Perform a ritual to strengthen the veil and seal the breach between worlds. The instructions came in fragments, disjointed yet strangely coherent. When he opened his eyes, he remembered every detail. The journal confirmed what the voices had said. Flipping through its pages, Ethan found a section describing a ceremony designed to repair the veil. It required the shard, the locket, and specific words written in a language he didn't recognize but somehow understood instinctively. According to the journal, the ritual had to be performed at dawn, in a place where the boundary between worlds was thinnest. Ethan knew exactly where that was, the cemetery where his mother's grave lay. He spent the rest of the night preparing, gathering. The artifacts, he packed them carefully into a small satchel along with candles, matches, and the journal. As he worked, the shard pulsed rhythmically, as though encouraging him or reminding him of the urgency of his task. The whispers returned too, quieter now but persistent, guiding him step by step. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke, over the horizon, Ethan was already on his way to the cemetery. The morning air was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. The cemetery looked different in the daylight, less ominous but no less mysterious. Dew clung to the grass, sparkling like tiny jewels under the rising sun. Ethan made his way to his mother's grave, setting up the items he'd brought. He placed the shard on the ground in front of the headstone, arranging candles in a circle around it. The locket rested nearby, its tarnished surface catching the light. Opening the journal, Ethan read the ritual aloud, pronouncing each word slowly and carefully. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the shard began to glow, its pulsing growing, stronger and faster. The air around him shimmered, distorting the scene like heat rising from asphalt. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him in a cacophony of sound. Ethan closed his eyes, focusing on the words as he continued chanting. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently. The candles flickered and went out, plunging the area into shadow despite the brightening sky. Ethan staggered to his feet, clutching the journal tightly. From the earth beneath him, shapes began to emerge. Dark, writhing forms that coiled and twisted like smoke given life. They surrounded him, pressing closer with each passing second. Panic surged through him, but the whispers urged him to keep going, to finish the ritual. Summoning all his courage, Ethan raised the locket above the shard and pressed it against the pulsing stone. A blinding flash of light erupted, engulfing the entire cemetery. The dark forms shrieked, recoiling from the brightness as if burned. The ground shook again, splitting open in jagged cracks that radiated outward from the grave. Ethan fell too, his knees shielding his face as the light intensified. When the brilliance finally faded, the cemetery was silent once more. The dark forms were gone, and the trembling had stopped. Exhausted, Ethan sat back on his heels, staring at the shard. Its glow had dimmed significantly, almost as if its energy had been drained. The locket, however, felt warm in his hand, its metal smooth and unblemished as though restored to its original state. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to breathe, relief washing over him. Whatever threat had been lurking beneath the surface, it was contained, for now. But as he looked around, he realized the cost of his actions. The ground near the grave was scorched, the grass reduced to ash. Even the headstone bore cracks, its inscription partially obscured. Though he had succeeded in sealing the breach, the damage left behind served as a stark reminder of the power he had unleashed and barely controlled. Ethan gathered the artifacts and returned home, his mind racing. The journal provided some answers, but many questions remained unanswered. Who or what were the beings beyond the veil? Why had his family been chosen to guard the shard and the secrets it held? And most importantly, why had his mother sacrificed herself to protect them? Over the next few days, Ethan pored over the journal, searching for clues. He discovered references to a group known as the Keepers, individuals entrusted with safeguarding the artifacts and maintaining the veil. His ancestors had been among them, passing down their duty through generations. Margaret Carter had been the last keeper in their line, and now the responsibility fell to him. But being a keeper wasn't just about protecting the artifacts. It was about understanding the balance between worlds. The journal warned that the veil was fragile, constantly under threat from forces seeking to exploit its weakness. The Watchers, the beings Ethan had encountered in the tunnels, were neither wholly good nor evil. They existed in a realm beyond human comprehension, bound by rules and desires incomprehensible to mortals. Their interest in the shard suggested they played a role in maintaining or breaking the veil. As Ethan delved deeper into the journal, he uncovered another unsettling truth. The ritual he had performed was only a temporary solution. The veil would weaken again, perhaps sooner than expected, and when it did, the consequences could be catastrophic. To truly seal the breach permanently, he would need more than the shard and the locket. He would need knowledge hidden in places far more dangerous than the tunnels beneath Maple Ridge. One entry in particular caught his attention. It spoke of a place called the Nexus, a convergence point where the boundaries between worlds were thinnest. According to the journal, the Nexus held the key to repairing the veil indefinitely, but reaching it would require navigating treacherous landscapes and facing trials designed to test even the strongest keepers. Failure meant not only death but also the collapse of the veil itself, allowing the Watchers free rein in the human world. Ethan knew what he had to do. Despite the risks, he couldn't ignore the call to action. The whispers guided him still, urging him forward, reminding him of the stakes. If he failed, countless lives would be at risk. If he succeeded, he might ensure peace for generations to come. With renewed determination, Ethan began making plans. He packed supplies, studied maps, and prepared himself mentally for the journey ahead. The road to the Nexus would be long and perilous, but he had no choice. The fate of two worlds rested in his hands. As he stood on the edge of town, looking out at the vast expanse of forest stretching before him, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. The shard pulsed gently in his pocket, a constant reminder of the weight of his mission. Whatever awaited him beyond the trees, he was ready, or as ready as he could be. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped forward, leaving Maple Ridge behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He was no longer just Ethan Carter, a man returning to his hometown. He was a keeper, bound by blood and destiny, to protect the fragile barrier between worlds. And he wouldn't stop until the job was done. A desolate, windswept cliff at sunset, overlooking a vast ocean that glows with an unnatural purple hue. In the foreground stands a man in his early 30s, holding a glowing black shard in one hand and a tarnished silver locket in the other. His expression is tense but determined as he gazes into the distance, where the horizon seems to ripple like water. Behind him, shadowy figures, tall, gaunt beings with elongated limbs and hollow eyes, are partially visible, their forms flickering in and out of existence. The air around them shimmers unnaturally, suggesting the presence of another world, bleeding into this one. Swirling clouds above cast eerie shadows over the scene, emphasizing the gravity of the moment. Part 5, 1200 words. Ethan stood on the edge of the cliff, staring out at the strange, shimmering horizon. The journey to the Nexus had been grueling, testing every ounce of his strength, courage, and resolve. He'd faced trials that pushed him to his limits, treacherous paths through foggy forests, ancient ruins guarded by unseen forces, and puzzles that required both logic and intuition to solve. Along the way, the whispers never left him, guiding him forward even when doubt threatened to pull him back. Now, here he was, standing at the convergence point between worlds. The Nexus pulsed with energy, its presence almost overwhelming. The sky above churned with swirling colors, not just blue or gray, but shades of violet, gold, and deep crimson. The ocean below seemed alive, its waves rippling unnaturally, reflecting light in ways no natural body of water ever could. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. In his hands, Ethan held the shard and the locket, their combined energy resonating with the environment around him. The shard's glow had grown stronger since he arrived, pulsing in rhythm with the hum in the air. The locket, once dull and tarnished, now gleamed brightly, its surface warm to the touch. Together they felt like keys waiting to unlock something monumental. As Ethan approached the cliff's edge, the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. Shadows flickered at the corners of his vision, growing more solid with each passing second. Slowly the Watchers emerged from the haze, their tall, gaunt forms taking shape. Their hollow eyes locked onto him, filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. Curiosity? Anticipation? Hunger? One of the beings stepped closer, its movements fluid yet unsettling. Unlike the figure he'd encountered in the tunnels, this one radiated power, its presence commanding attention. It tilted its head slightly, studying him as if weighing his worthiness. Then, without warning, it spoke, not in words, but directly. into his mind. "You are the last of your line," it said, its voice echoing like a chorus of whispers. "The keeper who stands between chaos and order. Will you mend what has been broken?" Ethan swallowed hard, clutching the shard and locket tighter. "I will," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "But I need your help. Tell me how." The being didn't answer immediately. Instead, it extended a long, skeletal hand toward the horizon. Ethan followed its gesture, noticing for the first time a faint crack running across the sky. It looked like a fracture in glass, splitting the vibrant colors into jagged pieces. The veil, the barrier between worlds, was visibly weakening, threatening to collapse entirely. "The bond between realms must be restored," the Watcher continued. "Place the shard into the rift. Speak the words given to you. Only then can balance return." Ethan nodded, understanding what he had to do. Stepping closer to the edge of the cliff, he raised the shard high above his head. Its energy surged, responding to the proximity of the nexus. The whispers grew louder, forming a chant in his ears. Closing his eyes, Ethan recited the ritual incantation written in his mother's journal, his voice carrying over the wind. The effect was immediate. The shard shot upward, propelled by an unseen force, and embedded itself into the crack in the sky. A blinding light erupted, engulfing everything in its path. Ethan shielded his face, feeling the heat wash over him as the veil began to repair itself. The fracture sealed slowly, the colors of the horizon blending back together until the sky returned to its normal state. When the light faded, the Watchers were gone. The air felt lighter, calmer, as though a great weight had been lifted. Ethan collapsed to his knees, exhausted but relieved. He had done it. He had repaired the veil and sealed the breach. For now, the danger was over. But as he sat there catching his breath, he realized the cost of his actions. The shard was gone, absorbed into the veil to maintain its integrity. Without it, the artifacts that had guided him throughout his journey were now incomplete. The locket remained in his hand, its warmth fading as the connection to the shard dissolved. Even the whispers, which had been his constant companions, fell silent. Ethan knew this wasn't the end. Being a keeper meant accepting that the veil would always need protection, that threats would inevitably arise again. But for now, he had fulfilled his duty. His family's legacy lived on through him, ensuring peace for future generations. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Ethan rose to his feet. Turning away from the cliff, he began the long journey back to Maple Ridge. Though the road ahead would likely bring new challenges, he walked, with a sense of purpose. He had faced the unknown and emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for everyone who called this world home. Back in town, life resumed its quiet pace. Few people noticed Ethan's return, let alone the burden he carried. To them, he was simply another resident of Maple Ridge, a man who kept to himself and tended to his late mother's house. But inside, Ethan knew he was different. He had seen things others couldn't imagine, fought battles they would never understand. He kept the locket close, a reminder of what he had sacrificed and what he still owed to the world. Occasionally, he thought he heard faint whispers, barely audible echoes drifting on the wind. Whether they were real or imagined, he couldn't say, but he welcomed them, knowing they were part of who he was now. Ethan Carter wasn't just a man. He was a keeper, bound by blood and destiny to protect the fragile boundary between worlds. And though the journey had changed him forever, he wouldn't trade it for anything. After all, some burdens were worth carrying for the sake of everyone else.